Hey y'all, so let's dig in this week. I'm really excited about where we're going. Last week we talked about the disobedient, right? And the importance of obeying God's words and his commands. That is a proof of our faith. No, we are not saved by our works. It's not anything that we do to earn salvation, but our works do prove our salvation. They prove that we are followers of Jesus Christ. And so I want to just come into that today to tie it out. We're going to be in Matthew 7. This is a very familiar passage for us. I'm sure it's part of it's a little parable that Jesus told. And it's in Matthew 7, 24 through 27. And it says, "So everyone who hears these words of mine and acts upon them, obeying them, will be like a sensible, prudent, practical, wise man who built his house upon the rock. And the rain fell and the floods came and the winds blew and beat against that house, yet it did not fall, because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a stupid, foolish man who built his house upon the sand. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell. And great and complete was the fall of it." So, we've been talking about the roots, our firm foundation, being firmly planted. And this is a pretty simple illustration. It's something we absolutely all understand. Several things that I want to pull out of this passage. Hears these words of mine and does them. When we do the words that Jesus tells us to do, when we follow his commands, we are obedient. So he said, and I love the Amplified because it makes things real simple and easy to understand, right? So everyone who hears these words of mine and acts upon them, obeying them. So when you act upon the words and you obey them, you will be like a sensible, prudent, practical, wise man who built his house upon the rock, which of course the rock is a firm foundation. You're not going to build your house upon sand. You're going to level it out. You're going to pack it down. You don't want rocks and air pockets, or, I'm not a builder or an engineer by any means, but you want a firm, packed foundation. And that's what God's words are. He upholds all things by the word of his power. And then, of course, he says, and everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a stupid or a foolish man who built his house upon the sand. Which, every time we go to the beach, the kids love to build a sandcastle, and they try to build it in a place that the waves are not going to wash it away. Do you know how many times they've been successful? How many times at the end of the day that sandcastle is still there? The waves always wash the sand away, which is why in verse 27 it says, "And great and complete was the fall of it." Now, here's something that I really like to point out in this passage, and if you've been with me for any length of time, you've probably heard it before, but it's the same winds and the same rains that beat against the house, whether it's the house of the wise builder or the foolish man. The wording that is used in the Greek, it's the same. The rain fell, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against the house. Verse 27, the rain fell, floods came, and the winds blew and beat against the house. So it didn't matter, whether you are the foolish builder or foolish, the foolish man or the wise builder. They both live in this earth, in this fallen world. We all, Christian, non-Christian, obedient, disobedient, godly, ungodly, follower, not follower, we all live in this broken world, and we all deal with brokenness in our lives every day. But the difference is the foundation that we have in our ability to come through the brokenness, to have restoration from the brokenness. And the only way that we're going to see brokenness dispelled or put back together or be restored is if we are founded on that firm foundation. It's the same winds and the same rains. Now, the last thing I'll say about this, because we're at 5.5 minutes, is this: Jesus gives this parable about being obedient to the teachings, hearing my words and obeying them, in Matthew, at the very end of Matthew chapter 7, which is how he closes out the extensive teaching of the Sermon on the Mount. So the Sermon on the Mount, which we all know, takes the Beatitudes. You start in Matthew chapter 5. Matthew 5, 6, and 7 are from the Sermon on the Mount, or they give what Jesus talked about in the Sermon on the Mount, which is Jesus teaching about the kingdom. He teaches extensively about the kingdom of God. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. He talks about all of that in these chapters. And then why would you be worried about anything? But seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all of these things will be added unto you. That's in these chapters. And then at the end of this, he says, so everyone who hears these words of mine and acts upon them, obeying them, will be like a sensible, prudent, practical, wise man who built his house upon a rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, yet it did not fall, because it had been founded on a rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a stupid or foolish man who built his house upon the sand. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great and complete was the fall of it. And when Jesus finished these sayings, the Sermon on the Mount, the crowds were astonished and overwhelmed and bewildered with wonder at his teaching. For he was teaching as one who had the authority, as the scribes did not. So this is how he concluded that Sermon on the Mount, which tells you the weight that Jesus put on hearing and obeying the teachings about the kingdom. And we'll pick up for tomorrow. I'll see you then. Bye, y'all.